world where the media coverage often focuses on so much negativity, we believe that these positive stories of hope should be highlighted. And another thing that makes us a bit unique is that we continue a lifelong partnership with our awardees. And in that regard, we've worked with Church of Sweden, which is part of the WCC, to have convenings of all these activists so that they can learn from each other and share strategies of what is effective in bringing peace. I'd just like to share some of the examples of the individuals we've supported over time. Our 2008 laureate is Asha Hagi from Somalia. She had a very innovative strategy in the 2000 peace talks where she saw that the conflict was being bogged down due to the 5 clans, which were, it was almost impossible to have any sort of contact between them. The positions were quite irreconcilable. So she helped form a 6th clan, and this was the clan of women, who were women from all the other 5 clans. And this was able to facilitate a shuttle diplomacy, which she led, which allowed for a breakthrough at that time in Somalia, and which also led, for example, for a 12% quota for women being represented in the transitional federal parliament. And she continues at great personal risk, continuing in that peace process. Also, recently she has been a member of the transitional parliament herself. And another example, perhaps at the international level, just to showcase the breadth, is Alan Ware, who many in Geneva may know of. He started as a kindergarten teacher in New Zealand, and he managed to get peace studies in the national curriculum. And more lately now, he has been lobbying very hard with parliamentarians to create nuclear weapons-free zones across the world, and also been instrumental in the judgment of the International Court of Justice that gave a strong restraint on use of nuclear weapons. So I'll just leave it there. We believe in continuous support of peacemakers, and we believe that we really need to have sustained engagement with them. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Heikki Huttunen. I'm from Finland. I'm an Orthodox priest, and I work now as the General Secretary of the Conference of European Churches. We are an organization of 115 churches in Europe from Canary Islands to Vladivostok, and the broader Europe, so to say. And in our organization, peace building has meant bridge building. Our organization has its roots in the period of the Cold War, and the main purpose was simply to make communication possible between churches and Christians, individuals, over the Iron Curtain. And so there are many instances in our history since the 1950s where this has been possible to do, and where this has led to human contacts and church contacts and the fruits that they can bear. In today's life, we live in the time after the Iron Curtain, but to our great disappointment, we can see that this is not the time when walls would not be built. We see more walls and differences in Europe and around Europe than there were before, perhaps more than ever. There is the war that we in the European Union think we can build around our fortress Europe, which will not hold, as we know. We have the wall between the north and the south in Europe, caused by the economic crisis and the way we handle it. And then we have the walls of difference that are coming into our societies in different ways. So this is very much present in our work today, how to build these bridges, how to enable people to relate to each other, how to overcome enemy images, how to deal with wounded memories, how to heal them, and how to deal with relationships between majorities and minorities, and those who think they are majorities and those who experience to be minorities, etc. So this is very much present in our work, and then also we relate to the European Union. That's one of our tasks to try to bring the concerns and the issues of the churches to the European institutions, to the powers that be. So we do deal with political issues. We work with position papers. One of the current issues is the question whether there is an intention to militarize the European politics in the European Union. This is a very sensitive issue, but maybe it can be named here. That's the kind of things we try to be alert to. I'd like to quote two other examples of our work. Just 2 weeks ago, we had a very significant seminar in Zagreb, in Croatia, dealing with the issue of religious minorities as part of a multicultural society. And as you may understand, the question of minority-majority is very sensitive in the Western Balkans, but also in many other situations in Europe. So we're very happy to open up that discussion a little bit. And a month from now, we'll have another interesting encounter in Denmark, where we have invited people to discuss what does it mean to be church in today's Europe? Meaning, how do we relate to the phenomenon of migration, which changes our church geography, our religious geography, and what is the mission of our churches here? And we hope that we can relate this discussion with the WCC Faith and Order document, Church Towards a Common Vision, which is a part of the global ecumenical discussion.
Mm-hmm. Well, my name is Heinrich Bedford-Strohm. I serve as the Bishop of the Bavarian Lutheran Church, and at the same time as the Chairman of the Council of the Evangelical Church in Germany. Nobody knows what that is. It's the United, the Reformed, and the Lutheran Churches of Germany. 23 million Protestant Christians in Germany who join in the Evangelical Church of Germany. As the churches in Germany, the Protestant churches in Germany, we are involved in peace work in many ways. I will maybe mention first prayer, simply prayer, bringing before God the suffering of the people, and looking at the world at this moment, seeing the images, the photos of Aleppo and the other places, and feeling powerless. I think prayer is very important, not just psychologically. It's important to not let this be forgotten and not get used to it. So it's important to bring it before God. And then a second important thing, you have mentioned it already, communication. The worst reason, or the probably most important reason for violence, for war, is non-communication, miscommunication. I have just come back from the Holy Land in Jerusalem. It's unbelievable. It's depressing to see how two peoples do not communicate, and they're completely separate worlds. And that is one of the reasons why we experience what we experience there. So churches can be an agent of communication, a very important aspect of the work of churches. Then, of course, development cooperation. My own Bavarian Lutheran Church, for example, supports a trauma center in northern Iraq that I've, of course, visited also. And many other things. Bread for the World is there in the refugee camps in other parts of the world, and tries to help to make possible a life in dignity for people, and to encourage people who are advocating for changes that make a life in dignity possible. So that is a very important part of the work of our churches. And maybe the church network itself, I mean, it concerns many of us here at the table, and especially the unions, the global church unions. That is extremely important in this time. The churches are the born agents for a global civil society. They are rooted in all the local communities everywhere in the world. And at the same time, they have a common voice, they have a common ground, they have a common motivation, the one Jesus Christ, the one Lord, around which we are all the community which we are. I don't see any more powerful global civil society agent than the churches. And we need to live up to this responsibility that we have as churches, as a church, international ecumenical church network. And lastly, political advocacy. And that has very much to do with what I just said, because probably the most important task for us as an international church network is telling stories from one part of the world to the other. I have mentioned that it's 23 million people that I represent. That is important, because we in Germany, we have a lot of possibilities to talk to people. The CEOs of big companies are members of our churches. So when I go to Malaysia, I tell my brother, the bishop there, tell me if there's a German company not living up to their ethical standards that they talk to me about when I speak to them. Tell me, so I can go with a story and ask them why they're doing what they're doing. And I can tell stories of those in other parts of the world at public events where I have all the bankers of Germany in front of myself. So, and this is very effective, to tell the story. There are many good people. They don't want to do bad. They don't understand what they are doing in other parts of the world in many cases. So I think as churches we have lots of possibilities. I can say that at least for the German context, and many others in different contexts have their own possibilities.
Good evening. My name is Ralston Deffenbaugh. I serve with the Lutheran World Federation as the Assistant General Secretary for International Affairs and Human Rights. The Lutheran World Federation is the worldwide communion of Lutheran churches. We're headquartered here at the Ecumenical Center and have been established in Geneva since 1947, and during all of that time have been living together with the World Council of Churches in a very good partnership here at the Ecumenical Center. I'd like to talk about three areas in which LWF is currently engaged in peacemaking. The first I'll mention is what happened in Lund, Sweden on Monday this week. We talk about Geneva, city of the Reformation. It was quite remarkable what happened in Lund that was planned in part from Geneva, from the Lutheran World Federation, where Pope Francis and the leaders of the LWF, our President Munib Yunan and our General Secretary Martin Junge, co-hosted a commemoration of the Reformation anniversary. And this was a commemoration talking about the positive aspects of the Reformation, of repentance for the negative consequences, and then also looking forward how we can try to heal these wounds in Western Christianity that have been there for half a millennium. And it was quite remarkable that this event was not only one of sort of looking inward and having a theological agreement or coming together, but also trying to send us out into the world for service. And part of the events on that day, on Monday, were the signing of an agreement between Caritas Internationalis and the World Service of the Lutheran World Federation to more closely collaborate in service for others. And that segues to the second area in which we're engaged so strongly in peacemaking, and that is what we call diapraxis, or dialogue through service. The LWF has a long history of refugee work. We're the largest faith-based partner of the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. Today we're helping serve with about 2.3 million refugees in different parts of the world, the overwhelming majority of whom are Muslim. So you have a Christian faith-based organization helping to serve Muslim people in need. And I think this is a sign of peace. The third example I'd like to give is Geneva, an international capital. Of course, this is where the United Nations has a lot of its humanitarian and human rights work is headquartered in Geneva. And we, as LWF, engage quite strongly with the United Nations here, both on the refugee side with UNHCR, but also on the human rights side with the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the Human Rights Council, and other human rights mechanisms. And part of what we try to do as LWF is to bring the voices from the local areas where we have member churches or where we have World Service operations, and to bring those voices onto this global stage, which is in Geneva, so that we can both celebrate where people's rights and dignity are being respected, but also bring to light situations where they're not, and hopefully work for that resolution.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Marilena Viviani. I'm the director of the UNICEF Geneva Liaison Office. I'm very pleased to be here with this distinguished panel. Also spent quite some time in the field myself with UNICEF, addressing some of the critical issues affecting children in conflict zone in the Middle East and Africa. So I also been part of some of the pioneering work done by UNICEF in peace education, and I will come back to that at the end of this short presentation. Why UNICEF, why children, why are we so concerned by looking at peace? We know that the number of children offended by conflicts is high, extremely high. One would be too much, but we are speaking at about 264 million children, and the numbers are increasing. I think that this is a tragic reality, and the way we try to address it is by, of course, looking at how to alleviate the impact of conflicts and wars, but also how to prevent them and how to work on peace building through programs for children. We work on that at the intersectoral level. We are a children agency. We work on starting on the principle of a child rights, and our work was recognized in 1964 with the Nobel Peace Prize. When I was a child, my dream was to win a Nobel Peace Prize. So somehow I feel, very, not because I have done, but I think that what we do at UNICEF in a humble and simple way can contribute to building peace. We mentioned of the way we alleviate the impact of conflicts on children. I think it's quite known, the work we do on health, also on the psychosocial support, healing not only the wounds that are huge and visible, but also the invisible wounds. And we think that by addressing the psychosocial aspects of the impact of conflicts and war on children, we can also attempt to address to break the intergenerational cycles of violence and wars that we heard of the Middle East, where I spent more than 12 years of my professional life, and the importance to see how we can not only help children to address these issues, but also to work with their educators and to understand the causes of conflicts and to solve them in a peaceful way. And we know that the impact of war is not just, as we say, loss of life and wounds. It's also attacks on schools, attacks on hospitals. We saw that also in the recent images on what's going on currently in Syria, and also recruitment of children themselves as child soldiers. I mean, the implications of wars and peace are huge, and in the interest of time, I will not go into all of them, but it's really a very, it's a very huge aspect and phenomenon that affects the basic principles of child rights in all their dimensions and in terms of child protection of these rights. We were asked also to be very concrete. So what have we done recently? I say in my own simple experience, I've been working on peace education in several conflicts, including with many churches, many organizations, and maybe the second part we can come back to that. But I would like just to briefly tell you some of the also results we have achieved, some of the practical ways we can work in the field as a UN agency with all the challenges, but still with all the opportunities. Through a recent experience, it was a peace building, education, and advocacy program that we implemented in 14 countries, looking at peace building in a, as I say, intersectoral and comprehensive way. Some examples were quite successful. In South Sudan, despite all the challenges, we were able to develop a curriculum for peace building from early childhood development, primary education, secondary, and universities. In Côte d'Ivoire, we work with mothers from different ethnic groups through the same program, and we learn lessons also how they could be together in what we call early childhood development centers, that they will find solutions and also go back into their communities and contribute to dialogue among others members who will not talk. In Pakistan, a huge program with almost 25,000 young people from different also religions and backgrounds who through youth and sport activities were able to work together, again, with the methodology to build peace, solve conflicts together, and understand the importance to live and be educated together. And another example is around water. We know water management will be also an issue in Ethiopia and also in Darfur. We have projects where, through this peace building project, where by addressing water management in different groups, we could also put elements of peace building and conflict resolution, and again working together and protecting in this way children, not only as present generations, as subjects of rights, but also future generations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Olav.
Thank you. When did the ecumenical movement get the Nobel Peace Prize? In 1931. Outside my office there is a bust of Nathan Söderblom, the Swedish Archbishop, who called the church leaders together in Stockholm in 1925 with a vision that was then building up to be the ecumenical vision, and a vision also for a council of churches. And in 1931 this was given the attention of a Nobel Peace Prize. But I say this also because it connects not only to our history, but also to what has been the ethos of the ecumenical movement since its very beginning. How do we bring the churches together so that they can witness together, but also build the bridges over the gaps between people in our world, as it was a tough reality in the First World War, in the Second World War, and as we have seen in many other places. But it is also to say that the commitment of the World Council of Churches to work for what we call a just peace is both to follow up this tradition and this commitment, but also to say we need to think new ways about what peace is. And therefore, with this concept of just peace, actually we also open up the question, what does it really mean? And we have had discussions about what it means conceptually, as an alternative to the concept of just war. But we also have developed it as a way to build the peace from the bottom, in the communities, with the earth, in the marketplaces, between the nations. And after our assembly in 2013, in Busan, in Korea, we have said we need to address different contexts as a fellowship of churches, and particularly work with the churches who find themselves in areas of conflict, to strengthen their contribution, to be peacemakers, to bring the local, the national, and international relations we have together so that we can make a stronger effort. And I could mention countries like some of you have mentioned, and others where we try to do this together with our member churches. I could add to the list particularly South Sudan, where we have together with also some of our partners of ACT Alliance a strong commitment with the National Council of Churches to be the sign of the unity of that vulnerable and very young nation that is now almost falling apart totally from tribal and other rivalries, and where the churches and the church leaders actually are one of the few, if not the only, really credible voices of unity of the nation across these divisions. And last week, actually before the events in Lund, together with the Roman Catholic Church, we invited them to come to Rome to have a meeting with the Pope and to discuss how we and the worldwide church, represented by the Pope, can make a new effort. And this is a kind of sign also of this reality of working together with the common calling and the common commitments we have. Another example I could like to mention is Ukraine, where we have tried to visit, to understand, to speak with different parties in the East and the West, to speak with the churches, but also to try to bring an understanding of that this conflict in Ukraine is part of a bigger conflict, a bigger picture, where we as churches cannot allow ourselves to be divided and be divided with the political division, where we have again a very strong role of making the channels open and keep them open for cooperation and for the unity of the church, but also for the peace of the people. And a third area, and not a country, I would like to mention, in addition to also what is said, is the interfaith relations, where we have a very strong and a growing commitment, working very closely with some other faith organizations or faith leaders, but definitely also to address that dimension of conflict in a new way. As we unfortunately know, it is mixed into many conflicts, sometimes kind of source of conflict, sometimes really adding to the conflict, sometimes used as a pretext for conflict. And in Nigeria, we this fall together with the National Council of Churches in Nigeria and the Muslim counterpart in Nigeria, opened a center in Kaduna, which should be a center for listening to the stories of violence together and also trying to address them and trying to find new ways of building a future together as Christians and Muslims in Nigeria. I think I will stop there to not make the list too long, but to say I also, when I listen to you, I hear how much we actually have in common, also with, at the moment, with UNICEF, as we have a commitment and an agreement of developing the churches as more qualified to deal with children's rights and protect children.
Yes, many thanks for your assessment and for your statements. You have touched upon the advantages of churches in the process of building peace, like the bishop said that you are the natural agent of communication. You were mentioning the universal network of the ecumenical movement and also of other religions. But I would like to ask you, where are the limits of the churches when it comes to peace? Are there any obstacles, or what kind of obstacles have you faced when you were in the process of building peace? Can I ask probably Olav and Ralston and the bishop, please?
When we discussed this in our central committee this June, we had a panel about violence and religion, and one of the panelists said, he was a diplomat, a former diplomat and foreign minister, and he said, you have to be aware when you discuss this that sometimes the church leaders are those who are the obstacles for peace. And I think we have to acknowledge that we are not only the peacemakers, sometimes we are also having interest or pursuing interests that are not really making peace. That is one obstacle we have to face ourselves. Another obstacle is that the churches are bound by some kind of loyalty to this or that party, so that they become biased also in their approach to peace.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the many ways, the many limits we have, but one, of course, is the church is a human institution, and many people in the churches have other loyalties than their religious loyalty, their loyalty to their nation and to their ethnic group or their economic loyalties, whatever. And just because someone may be a member of a church doesn't mean that they're going to behave in the best way, as we all know. Also, it's difficult to have a lot of communication within the churches to really know what's going on and so forth. We face that within the LWF as we try to work with some of our member churches in areas of the world where there are language barriers or where there are barriers of distance communication, economics, and so forth, and sometimes the communication and the messages come through only very, very dimly.
I think it is very clear that you can only be part of the solution when you know that you're part of the problem. And that is a rule that has to do with right-wing populism. We also have some of these people in our own churches. And it's certainly the case with peace building. It's simply a fact that churches are called churches, but the question to whom their first loyalty goes is not in any case answered in the way we would want it to be answered. It's an old theme. H. Richard Nebo wrote a book on Christ and culture, and there are different versions that he describes how Christ and culture can be mingled up or can be mixed up and must be mixed up in a certain way, because religion is always contextual, but sometimes culture is a dominant force. And so I think the only response to it can be praying, listening to Christ, looking at the Word, being changed, and looking at yourself critically rather than knowing everything already, because often enough it's the voice of culture that is disguised in the voice of religion. So I think that's what the Swiss theologian Karl Barth has again and again emphasized, that Christ is in the center and criticizes culture. So we need to learn from that. And then maybe the last thing, the limits, and that's a really difficult question. Christians either don't have power or shy away from power, because there is an understandable hesitancy in using power. At the same time, many of those conflicts have to do with the question what direction power goes. So I think we need to be more courageous to engage in giving good advice to politicians, in case we have the possibilities. It depends on the context, of course. But I don't think that it's enough to criticize politicians for using their power. I think we need to speak up publicly in a way that is helpful to a politician who really seeks peace. And what I'm now saying has quite grave consequences, because it also means that we need to think very openly about how we deal with military violence, for example. I openly confess, I look at Aleppo, I look at northern Iraq. I have visited northern Iraq when the IS was even further there. I have talked to the people there, and they have implored me to create a military protection zone by the United Nations. United Nations. But they still wanted to be protected militarily. So I think we have to discuss these questions, and we should discuss it openly rather than forbidding us to think certain things. And that's, at least for me, I struggle with that question very much, because I look at these pictures and I think, what can we do? But it's a powerless cry out in a certain way.
Yes, yes, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to continue the thought a little bit, saying that perhaps, at least in the European situation, that our churches would need to learn to put the right questions, to ask the right questions, not maybe always to tell the answers. Jesus is the answer, but what is the question? And I think it has to do with the kind of discussion that you were describing. And in order to pose the questions, our churches need to hear the global story. We need to be those who are conscious about belonging to a global family of humanity. it's not self-evident for everyone, and not for us either, but we have the unique network in our churches and in the ecumenical movement.
Yes, thanks. I'd like to ask the World Communion of Reformed Churches about the history of Christianity. Christianity hasn't been always a force of good and a force of peace. You know, on the contrary, wars have been fought or were fought in the name of Christianity. How does this, or does this pose a problem for you in your current efforts to build peace, to bring people together, to reconcile?
Yes. Well, yeah, I think as has been noted here, we have to acknowledge that we are human. We are sinful by nature, and we don't always act in the best interests of our faith. We often, most often, probably act in what we feel are our best self-interests. And the history of the Reformation shows that. The conflicts we've had, the fights we've had amongst each other. The Reformed are not known for uniting by and large over the last 500 years. We continue to squabble and spat, maybe not as violently as we used to. But it continues to be an issue for, I think, all of us. And we have to first acknowledge that we are sinful and confess these sins, and then move to the next set of questions and the next challenges. As Reformed people, outside of maybe Scotland, I don't believe that we are a majority in anywhere. We find ourselves in a minority, even in Christian nations, and we find often that our membership in places like Indonesia, Nigeria, and certain places are on these cutting lines too of interfaith breakpoints. And while often our victims, while we're often victims in certain circumstances like that, we also are perpetrators. And it's tough because it intermixes in with the ethnic, with the cultural, with all these other layers. And I think we really need to, at that point, heed the words of the Apostle Paul in Romans when he exhorts people to do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. And it starts here individually with the help of the Holy Spirit in Christ, and then we can move out. But it's tough, and yeah, we're not innocent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks. Before we move to question time, I would like to ask Sharan and the lady from UNICEF, how is it to work with church organizations, with religious organizations? Can you give us some insights? Please, ladies first, let's say.
Thank you. And thanks. Really, I'm pleased to highlight some of the most recent progress on the partnership with the World Council of Churches, and it is specific to working on commitments for children, looking at what can be found in the Christian principles, in the Christian theology, and on the Convention of the Right of the Child. It's an innovative partnership. It was signed about 1 year ago, but in a relatively short time, because these are huge steps forward in creating innovative partnership. We were able to draft together commitments for children, and some of them are critical to address the issues of children victims of conflict. And not only in looking, as I mentioned earlier, at how to alleviate the impact of conflict by, for instance, commitments on how all churches, and it's not just the institutions, all people and the parishes, the communities, all members of the church could contribute to promote the rights of children to be protected from conflicts, in preparedness, working with adolescents, with children themselves, in providing psychosocial support, but something that has a huge potential, I think, to take us very, I would say, further than when we are now, is also to speak to governments. We heard the importance to work at the political level without being political, or without being politicians, looking at the governments, how they can fulfill their obligations, and something very difficult, especially for UN agencies where we need these strong partnerships, also how to work with non-state parties. We heard, for instance, situations like North Iraq and other groups, how even groups who are not recognized by a government can protect the right of the children, and something also that we heard today, in which we count a lot on this partnership, is how to work on the interfaith dialogue to protect the right of the children. So this is a very concrete example, and the commitments are also, the importance of these commitments that they were discussing, they were prepared and also put forward in a consultative and inclusive way, working at with grassroots organization, but also at the global level, with UNICEF at the global level. So I think this is I would say, a promising, if I can be modest, but a promising but really very strategic way that UNICEF can work with a church, like the World Councils of Churches, to really build a better world for children that protects children's rights and protects them from violence and wars.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Marilena, many thanks. And Sharan, please.
Most of you would be aware that over the past 5 years across the world, whether it's Latin America or Russia, we've seen this shrinking spaces for civil society and also for peace builders. I mean, they've been delegitimized in terms of being called foreign agents. They have been killed. They have been arrested. And for us, we in 2013 received a distress call from our laureate in Colombia, which is a grassroots agrarian peace organization, that they were just feeling isolated and that several of their leaders had been assassinated, and they felt an urgent need to to end this isolation. And it was then that we decided, let us convene all our Latin American laureates for the first time and see if there's any sort of solidarity we can form. But we didn't want to do that alone, and we found a partner that we shared values with, and that was Church of Sweden, which is a member of World Council of Churches, which was also very much dealing with the issue of shrinking spaces. That first convening was very useful in linking not only all our laureates in the region together, but also linking the laureates with member churches and partners of Church of Sweden in the region, because I think a lot of human rights defenders, a lot of NGOs, they are vilified and they are often minorities in many countries, but when they are linked with progressive church bodies, then they're stronger together. And we've seen that. We've replicated the series of conferences now with Church of Sweden in Cairo and in Mumbai, and just here in Geneva for the European laureates. I've worked with Ojot and with Ralston. We in fact just had a meeting in this very space on Monday, bringing together some of our laureates working on tribal rights, on minority rights, to have that engagement. So from the point of view of civil society, a true civil society also includes faith-based communities and churches, and I really see that collaboration as being one of the ways we can move forward in these very authoritarian times that we live in.
Okay, many thanks. We're running into extra time already, so I think it's time now for the audience question time. We have two mics on my left and on my right, and if you have a question, please introduce yourself, gentleman over there, and please tell us to whom your question is directed. Many thanks.
Thank you very much to the panelists. My name is Carlos Hurtado, and I am former staff of the World Council of Churches, and I'm originally from Argentina. Thank you for your stories, powerful stories and very uplifting. Let me note as a short preface to my question to say that one of the prophetic visions in the First Testament about peace in the world is that of transforming swords into pruning hooks. My questions have to do with the area of social and political advocacy. Perhaps one of the few winners, in inverted commas, of a world without peace is the armament industry. And I would like to hear from you whether you have some stories to tell us about your confrontation with governments or industry that produce armaments that destroyed the life of millions of people. Thank you.
Well, I can tell you stories about that. I can tell you a story, a very concrete story. There is a company in my own Bavarian church in Nuremberg that has 20% of its budget in arms production. And we have a policy in our church, our Bavarian Lutheran Church, by the way, as in the EKD as well. But we have a long-term, for a long time, we've had a policy of a sustainable investment, of ethical investment, and part of the investment policy is not investing any money with companies that have arms business in their thing. And then in our our annual report, there was an article on this policy, and there was a headline, pornography and then arms production or something. It was on one level because that's our policy. So I got a letter from this Protestant member of the Protestant church who is the owner of this big company, and 20% is in arms, and he felt insulted. So I said, and he wanted to talk to me. I said, well, come, I've always wanted to talk to an arms producer. So yes, I wanted to know. I wanted to, so he came, and we had a very good talk. Of course, I gave him the arguments why this is our policy, and I encouraged him to change his the panel of his production spheres, you know, to replace the arms production with civil production. And then we came into the very concrete discussions about if Germany does not have any arms production, then it's going to be others, and they set the standards, all these things, you know it. So that was, but it was good for me to talk to him. And I have given sermons when the Prime Minister of Bavaria went to Saudi Arabia and said that arms production in Bavaria is necessary to keep employment at the level. I have confronted it in the sermon, of course. We have, as the Protestant churches in Germany, we have a yearly press conference where actually it's not the Protestants, ecumenically, it's the Catholic and the Protestant churches, and we give a report on the level of arms production every year. And then we give a press conference and we say Germany is the third biggest, has been the third biggest arms producer in the world. Now it's the fourth biggest arms producer in the world. And we try to make it public. And we have had a EKD council decision on the Iraq situation after my visit there 1.5 years ago. No, a little bit more than a year ago. And no, 2 years ago, sorry. And one portion of this public statement was, of course, on arms production and on the fact that this whole conflict only could happen as it did because arms were brought into this region one after the other, and that we asked for the government for changing their arms export policy. So it's a topic. It's an absolutely important topic, and it's evil if you earn money, if you make profits for the profit motive with killing, with giving people the means of killing. I'm also saying I would make a difference between certain weapons that are produced for such wars and, for example, weapons for the police. Now we're all the way into the discussion on just policing and all these things that I tried to mention before. And that is a discussion that I think is open and must be open. So I would not say forbid all arms production. It sounds great, actually. But then what do I say? No police anymore? Well, now it's getting interesting, the discussion. Yeah, but I just want to show that this is an open question for me. But what you have asked me, I think the answer must be clear.
Olav, you want to do?
Well, thank you. I think this is a very important question when we discuss what is our advocacy role, not only towards the political institution, but also towards those who invest and profit from an enormous production of weapons. I just want to mention two examples where I've been involved in the last months, where we addressed it. One was actually a discussion we had in this room with the chief imam of the Al-Azhar Mosque in Cairo, particularly discussed violence and religion in the Middle East. And then we made a common statement focusing on the enormous pouring of weapons into the Middle East. Also to say that the terrorism is not only what individuals do with whatever weapon they have, it's a knife or a gun or a bomb, but it is the enormous pouring in of and militarization of the whole region. The structural violence that comes into the Middle East as almost as a testing field of new weapons and using all kind of new weapons, but also apparently supported by strong financial supporters. The war in Syria would stop if there were no trade of weapons and nobody financing the provision of weapons. The other example I would like to mention is that we had a consultation, the World Council of Churches and the National Council of Churches of Christ in the U.S. in Washington, D.C. 1.5 months ago, where we discussed particularly the situation in Israel-Palestine. And that was the same day as President Obama signed a new agreement with Israel of $28 billion support, military support. And for our American friends, it was both to say, these money, how is the U.S. accountable for that when you just give it as military support without asking for account? But on the other hand, they said, well, this is actually to support American military industry, because that was actually a condition for the support, that it should be spent in the United States as support or for buying weapons from the United States. So that is another example. What we tried to say, this is really the hard point we have to address.
Yes, please.
Thanks a lot to all the panelists. I'm Friederike Seidel, Special Advisor on Child Rights at the WCC. And I have a question to all panelists. It is to find out if there are any churches which have already had experience in giving the voice to children or adolescents on possible answers they may have and ideas and solutions they may have for peace building. I'm saying this because I know that UNICEF had a project called BioVision at some point, where they're bringing together Nobel Prize winners with 11, 12-year-olds who had very interesting ideas, innovative ideas. And by giving them their ears and their attention, they managed to develop incredible solutions for some problems. When I worked myself in Bosnia and Kosovo, I also experienced how actually a teenager was supported by AFP. And because she had lived the war, she grew up during the war, she wanted to create a school, a high school, for Bosniaks and Croats together. And today, she lived up her dream because she got that support from adults who listened to her project, and today she's an adult herself, and she lived through war and did a big peace building project. I was wondering if the churches are already doing something or could do more to give children a voice for solutions.
I'd say in the interest of timekeeping, if we get one or two panelists to answer the question. Yeah, please go ahead.
I would just like to say that 2 years ago, we worked with Church of Sweden to develop an exhibition, an educational traveling exhibition that has been going to different schools all over Sweden, which conveys some of our peace laureates and their work, and that is being slowly incorporated into some of the curriculum. So this is very much an experimental project, but we really hope that it would be a good collaboration.
Yeah, please.
In Europe, many churches are working very much right now on the question of religious instruction and the role of religion in schools, and how to help children of different backgrounds and different religions to encounter each other, to learn from each other. And you would be surprised to know how many school systems educate children without any contact to children of other faith or other ethnic background or other identity. So here we see a great opportunity, and not through silencing religion as a voice in society, but rather celebrating and exploring the multi-religious reality that we have.
Yes, many thanks. Are there any more questions from the audience? Don't hesitate. We have the gentleman over there, please. There's the mic.
Good evening. My name is Ojot Ujudu. I work with Lutheran World Federation with Rally Together. My question goes to Bishop, what you mentioned about storytelling as a way of peacemaking. I think that's really important. It came to my mind that in some parts of the world, storytelling is becoming really dangerous, alluding to what Sharan said earlier on the issue of civil society space, that church leaders, pastors who try to tell the truth, stories are sometimes end up in prison. In my country, I'm from Ethiopia originally, some pastors are in jail simply because they stood up for the right of communities. So I'm wondering what role do you see from church leaders in parts of the world that are free, so to say, who could speak openly to support church leaders in places where it's becoming dangerous to sort of talk about peace and human rights issues. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that question. It's an integral part of storytelling to know, to hear about people as you describe it, who have been imprisoned or even killed by governments for trying to speak up freely, and then the response to it depends very much on the situation. My and our experience is that it's not always the loud public voice. We have partners, we have friends, we have people in our network who even ask us not to speak up publicly because we make it worse, because they are the victims then. So you must, and there are some, especially evangelical organizations who always say speak up, and they accuse us for not helping our brothers and sisters. But it really depends on what's best for them, and sometimes it's also misused for a certain agenda, and we should not do that. We should listen to what people in danger really need and want, and there are different ways to respond. There are possibilities to try to talk to those responsible without public, to get people free. Amnesty International, my mother for 40 years, I think, she's now 90, she turned 90, she sent out the urgent actions for Amnesty International in the whole region with very specific people like the one you described, who were imprisoned, and there was a public all over the world, and people were released in many cases, and the churches can do very similar things. It's, for example, the demonstrations demonstrate against the IS, for example. Is that the most effective way when everybody agrees anyway that this is evil? So it's really, the response is really diverse. And you must, in each case, reflect upon what helps, what really helps. But telling the story is the most important.
Yes, many thanks. We have received 2 emails, one from Sweden and one from the Democratic Republic of the Congo. I think the email from Sweden and from the Congo are rather encouragements. From Sweden, we received the email from Tore Samuelson from Uppsala, and he is addressing especially the panelists here from Geneva, and he's saying, or he's asking, have you thought of establishing a peace museum, or rather house of peace, with exhibitions, activities as we have in Uppsala? I would encourage you to consider that in your aspiration to become the peace capital of the world, and then it stops. Right, and then we got this, I must say, very poignant email from the DRC. I will read it out, and I think that really is a nice way of wrapping up this very interesting and powerful panel. She's saying, I'm Betty, clergy from North Katanga. I'm interested in getting the summary of the panel on peace building because I will be conducting a workshop on peace building with women from my region. There has been a conflict for the past 3 months, and people are internally displaced. We need to bring people together as church and to listen to people's stories. I'm looking forward to hearing from you. I usually receive newsletters from the WCC. Reverend Dr. Betty, Democratic Republic of the Congo. Yes, and I now would like to thank the panelists for your very powerful and clear and open statements and contributions to this panel. It was really good, I must say, and also the audience that you managed to stay so long here with us. And now I would like to invite you to the reception we have prepared for you here in the hall outside this saal. Many thanks.